Welcome, everybody. We're happy you could join us today. Our guest that we're delighted to welcome is Reverend Malcolm Sinclair, who is going to tell us about Robbie Burns, the famous Scottish poet whose birthday is coming up and will be celebrated probably in several spots in the city. So, Malcolm, please take it away.
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to say how happy I am that Manor Road and John Joseph and your committee have invited me and my colleague David McKane to do this with you today. Burns' birthday is next week, and although COVID is cutting us short, we're going to make the most of it with you. I need to tell you that David McKane, who you see there, give us a wave there, Davey, my boy, and I were part of the Singing Ministers. And in 1975, when David was the minister at Hope United Church and I was in Victoria Village Church in North York, David decided to have a Burns supper for his Scottish folk. And we did that show. And then a couple of years later, we did our churches back to back. And then from then on, when people said, would you do this at our place? We always said yes. And there was no charge for it. We said, if you want to raise some funds, just make sure 10% of it goes to the Mission and Service Fund of the United Church. So we did about 30 to 40 shows a year, and this is our 47th year of the Singing Ministers. So we're down to just a few things at the bottom of the barrel, but they're the best. Our friend John Comrie, who was our accompanist for most of those years, died a few years ago. But we honor and remember John today. He could really feel his way through the piano, knew the material inside out and backwards, and was always ready to go. We'd phone him up and say, John, here it is February. We have a show scheduled in June. What do you think? And he'd say, let me check my book. And he'd open his book, which was totally blank, and take his pencil and he'd say, I think we can fit you in. And so off we would go. And when we thought we'd had enough of the show, he in his 80s would say, are you crazy? We've got a show to do. And we'd all jump in the car and do it. Anyway, that's a brief story of the Singing Ministers. And I'm very glad David McKane, my great colleague and friend of nearly 60 years, is with me today. And with you, I want to tell you a little bit about a Burns supper, because that's what we've done most of the time. You have probably attended them. They have the haggis, they have the piper, and all that stuff. And they always start with a joke or two to get you going. The host would get up and say, Burns suppers begin optimistically and end misty optically. And everyone would smile and wipe a tear from their eyes. And then the person would get up and tell you a bit about the Scottish character. Scots can create trouble in an empty house, they'd say. And Scots will lie, cheat, and steal, but will never give up their integrity. Scots love cooking with wine. They even put some in the food now and then. And on it would go about the Scottish character. And then you'd get a joke or two. And they'd always be between spouses in the household jokes. There was a whole series called That's When the Fight Started. My wife said to me one day, why don't you take me to a place I've never been? So I walked her into the kitchen, and that's when the fight started. And I said to her, she says to me one night, what's on the telly? And I says, it looks like dust to me. And that's when the fight started. She says, for Christmas, I'd like you to give me something shiny that goes from 0 to 300 in 10 seconds. So I gave her a bathroom scale, and that's when the fight started. And on. Down go the stories until the crowd is all softened up. And then you get into the haggis and the dinner and all the rest of it. And then there are the toasts of the evening, to the Twa Lands, and toast to the Queen, and a toast to the lassies, and a response from the lassies. And the highlight of a Burns supper is the immortal memory, a toast to the immortal memory of Robert Burns. And for 46 plus years, David McKane has become Robert Burns and mesmerized audiences. So the best way to present Robert Burns to you today is for you and I to meet him. So here's Dr. McKane. Off you go, sunshine.
Thank you, Malcolm, and thanks to all you folks who are looking in. There was a lad who was born in Kyle. It wasn't a day, wasn't a style. I think it's hardly worth the while. to be sae nice to Robin. My father was a farmer on the Carrick border, and carefully he bred me in decency and in order. My ancient but ignoble blood has coursed through scoundrels since the flood. I have lived the life of my imagination among devils, ghosties, witches, warlocks, spunkies, kelpies, wraiths, and apparitions. In my 16th year, I first committed the sin of rhyme. Och, once I've the money bonny loved a bonny lass, aye, and I love her still. And whilst her virtue warms my breast, I'll love my handsome Nell. She dresses so clean and neat, both decent and genteel. And then there's something in her gait that makes any dress look weel. The words were silly, but they were mine. And I was just 16, feeling all the feelings that a boy feels at that age, all the tenderness in him, all the frustrated passion in his blood, all the hopelessness of trying to put into words that miserable joy. Feelings that I have even now, as I remember Nellie Kirkpatrick in the harvest field, and the dizziness of being in love. I don't know why my heart beat so when I held her little hand to pluck out a nettle sting, or why I liked to linger with her on the way home. But thus it was, I was unwittingly initiated into that certain delicious passion I hold to be our dearest treasure here below. Her face is fair, her heart is true, as spotless as she's bonny o. The opening gown wet with dew, nay, purer is than Nanny o. I never thought to turn poet until I fell heartily in love. And then rhyme and song were, in a manner, the spontaneous language of the heart. My first true love was Miss Jean Armour. I first met Jean Armour at a penny fee wedding where my wee dog Lewis jumped between us in the set, and Jean was much put out. And I could only say, I wish you could find a lassie that would love me as well as my wee dog. She blushed and said nothing. But from that moment on, from being in love with all women, I was in love with one. She was in love with me.
Oh, my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love is like a melody that's sweetly played in tune. So fair art thou, my bonny love, say deep in love am I, and I will love thee still, my dear, till all the seas gang dry.
Being in love, we wanted to be married. But old Armour, her father and master mason in every sense of the word, said that he knew his own daughter better than God, packed her off to Paisley to be married to a weaver. Jean, my darling Jean, married to a weaver in Paisley. There's a pretty large portion of a bedlam in a poet at any time, but thereabouts I was 9 parts stark raving mad, because Jean was with my child. But her father would sooner see it bastard than own me as his son-in-law. It was said that when he heard of his favorite's condition, he fainted. And on being revived and was told that I was the father of the child, he fainted again. Ah, but the truth, I was desolate and angry. For fear of her father, Jean had denied her love for me. I tried everything I could to forget her, but I couldn't. She was in every part of me. There's not a bonny flower that springs on mountain, shaw, or green. There's not a bonny bird that sings, but minds me, oh my Jean. Deprived of her love, I buried myself in my verse. Ah, wee crimson-tipped flower, thou's met me evil in an evil hour, for I maun crush among the stour thy slender stem. To spare thee now is past my power, my bonny gem. And Mousy, thou art no thy lane, in proving forsick may be vain. The best laid schemes o' mice and men a gang aft the gley, and leave us naught but grief and pain for promised joy. Still, thou art blessed compared with me. The present only toucheth thee, but backwards cast my ee on prospects drear, and forward, though I canna see, I guess and fear. Give him strong drink until he winks, that's sinking in despair, and liquor good to fire the blood that's pressed with grief and care. Ach, why the deuce should I repine and be an ill forebodder? I'm 23, I'm 5'9", I'll go and be a soldier. But I didn't. I still knew all my old fears, all my nervous premonitions, still sweated under damnable headaches. My only recourse was to scribble verses into my commonplace book, making new verses out of old rhymes, new songs out of old tunes, songs such as Flow Gently, Sweet Afton.
Flow gently, sweet Afton, among thy green braes. Flow gently, I'll sing thee a song in thy praise. My Mary's asleep by thy murmuring stream. Flow gently, sweet Afton, disturb not her dream.
In 1786, I published my first book of poems. There were 618 copies printed, and 612 sold in the first week. I was suddenly proclaimed the Ayrshire Bard. At 27 years of age, I had been successful for the first time in my life. I only wish my good father had been alive to see it. I was invited to Edinburgh to publish a second copy. Edinburgh. Edinburgh was as foreign as Jamaica, but I went. In Edinburgh, I was as novel as the balloon ascent or the performing pig in the grass market, this poor ploughboy poet from Ayrshire. I could have been spoiled if I'd let myself, but I knew that the wind that swept me up would soon recede, leaving me pretty much as I was, and I knew exactly who I was. It was in Edinburgh that I knew or discovered a new sickness, strangeness. And it was in Edinburgh that I first met Nancy. Nancy was a grass widow several leagues above my station in life, but we soon became friends. Our affair reaching to the point where it must soon topple over when a letter arrived from home. Miss Jean Armour has been turned onto the streets by her parents for the good old cause. Oh, Jean. Oh, Nancy. Oh, God. Yet I knew what I must do. I had no choice. I must leave my Nancy. There is no trifling with human happiness. I must go home to Jean. There is no sporting with human misery. And so at the White Hart Inn in the Grass Market, I said my farewells to the capital, parted from my Nancy for the very last time. Misery. Misery is like love. To speak its language truly, you must have known it. You must have felt it. And what you feel, well, what you feel you must say.
Yea, fond kiss, and then we sever. Yea, farewell, and then forever. Deep in heart-wrung tears I'll pledge thee. Warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee. I'll ne'er blame my partial fancy. Nothing could resist my Nancy. But to see her was to love her. Love but her and love forever. Had we never loved, say kindly, had we never loved, say blindly, never met or never parted, we had ne'er been broken-hearted. Yea, fond kiss, and then we sever. Yea, farewell, alas, forever. Deep in heart-wrung tears I'll pledge thee. Warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee.
The Bastille has fallen. The Bastille, the most horrible prison in all of Europe, has fallen, and all of Europe rings with revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, and an end to the degradation of the poor. Oh, the times are dangerous. There is a trembling in the earth. There is an excitement in the air. But a man's place in this world is still measured in pounds, shillings, and pence, and not by the ideas in his head, which kept me a very poor man indeed. My political sentiments lay not with kings and queens, but with our American colonists, with their brothers and sisters in France, with anyone who was seeking freedom, who will not sing God Save the King, shall hang as high a steeple. But while we sing God Save the King, let's no forget the people. Banishment. Banishment to Australia is threatened to anyone who reads or writes for themselves. But these are England's laws, not Scotland's. Here's freedom to them that would read, and freedom to them that would write. There's none ever feared that the truth should be heard, but they whom the truth would indict. Oh, an inquiry has been ordered into my political activity. I have too much pride to be servile, not enough to be selfish. The mob may be the bulk of the nation, the titled throng its ornament, but it is we you and me, who are high enough to think and low enough to avoid corruption. We are the strength of a nation.
Is there for honest poverty that hangs his head and all that? The coward slave, we pass him by, we dare be poor for all that. For all that and all that, our toils obscure and all that. The rank is but the guinea's stamp, the man's the gold for all that. Then let us pray that come it may, as come it will for all that, that sense and worth o'er all the earth shall bear the gree and all that. For all that and all that, it's coming yet for all that, that man to man the world o'er shall brothers be for all that.
Struck by a fever in 1795, I took to my bed. And for a time, the dice spun doubtful. Well, madam, have you any commands for the next world? If there is another world, he lives in bliss. If not, he made the best of this. And the best of this was always for all of us so long ago. Or so it seemed in Auld Lang Syne. When I was a child, I thought as a child. And everyone was a child once. At 5 a.m. on July the 21st, in my 37th year, I slipped quietly away. The whole of Dumfries lined the streets for my funeral. It was the largest crowd ever seen in that town. And as the cortege passed on its way to St. Michael's churchyard and the rain began to fall, no one moved from those gathered solemnly to watch. As the rain came down, as the silence came down, as the sky darkened, and neither from man nor woman, child or dog was a single sound to be heard. At my burial, the volunteer militia of which I'd been a member fired a salute over the grave, almost killed the Presbyterian minister. Still, an honest man has nothing to fear, even granting he has been the sport of his own instincts. He goes to a God who gave him these, and God knows their force. And whatever God knows, God forgives. Oh, would some power the gift give us, to see ourselves as others see us. It would frae many a blunder free us, and foolish notion, what airs in dress and gait would leave us, and in devotion. Oh, God knows I'm no the man I should be, nor even yet the thing I could be, but 20 times I rather would be an atheist clean than under gospel cutters hid, just for a screen. Oh, no doubt I shall have much to answer for. Yet my philosophy has been simple enough. Whatever mitigates the woes or increases the happiness of others, that is my criterion of goodness. Whatever injures society as a whole or any person within it, That is my measure of iniquity. And if I could, oh, if I only could, I would wipe all tears from all eyes. Well, my friends, farewell. You know what the good book says. Whatsoever things are kind, whatsoever things are charitable, whatsoever things are gentle, whatsoever things are good, think on these things and think on Robbie Burns. My heart's in the Highlands. My heart is not here. My heart's in the Highlands a-chasing the deer, a-chasing the wild deer, following the roe. My heart's in the Highlands wherever I go. My heart's in the Highlands wherever I go.
Burns died at a young age. There was much written about him in the next 200 years, some jealous of his talent, others desperate to smear his name, to start rumors about him, many of which contemporary society has heard. A drinker, a womanizer, someone unreliable, but those who met him said there was nothing like his eyes. When he looked at you, he saw right into your soul. And a few years ago, the people of Scotland voted Robert Burns as the greatest Scot who ever lived. Well, before we go to the questions, I've got about 4 minutes. And just as a tail off at the end, thank you, David, for that, by the way. It's a thrill to hear you do it. Part of a Burns supper is the address to the haggis. So we might as well just address the haggis and get it over with. David and I did a show in a little country church called Udney, Ontario, up near Beaverton. It was the dead of winter, and the dinner was in the hall. And the local women of the church had decided to make haggis from scratch, which is pretty good. You take the pluck of a sheep and oatmeal and spices, and you put it inside a sheep's stomach, but they didn't have a sheep's stomach. So they put it inside a pair of industrial strength pantyhose. And they paraded it out into the room, and it was a long leg with a foot at the end. And they paraded this leg and foot around the room and set it down in front of David, who was going to address the haggis. And at one point, the addresser says, "His knife, see rustic labor decked, and cut ye up." And he threw the blade down, and it hit the steel work, and the blade went flying up in the air, did 3 circles, and fell on the floor. So they had to go to some local farmer and get a chainsaw to cut the haggis open. That was a memorable evening. I don't think I ate any. Anyway, this is what Address to a Haggis goes like. Burns wrote it just for fun for a Masonic Lodge meeting of which he was a member. "Fair for your honest sonsy face, great chieftain of the puddin race. Upon them all ye take your place, pinch, tripe or therm. Well are ye worthy o' grace, as langs my erm. The groaning trencher there ye fill, your hurdies like a distant hill. Your pin would help to mend a mill in time o' need, while through your pores the dews distill like amber bead. His knife, see rustic labour decked, and cut ye up with ready select, trenching your gushing entrails bright like ony ditch. And then, oh, what a glorious sight, warm, reeking, rich. Then horn for horn they stretch and strive, deal take the hindmost, on they thrive, till all their wheel-swelled kites feel either bent like drums, and all good man maist like to ride be thanking hymns. Is there that o'er his French ragout, or olio that would stow a sou, or fricassee would mak her spew with perfect scunner, looks down with sneering scornful view on sic a dinner? Poor devil, see him o'er his trash, as feckless as a withered rash, his spindle shank a good whiplash, his neve a knit, through bloody flood or field to dash. How unfit! But mark the rustic, haggis fed, The trembling earth resounds his tread. Clapping his wally neve a blade, he'll mak it whistle, and legs and arms and heads well sneed like tops of thistle. Ye powers what make mankind your care, and dish 'em out their bill of fare. Old Scotland wants nae skinking ware that joups in luggies. But if thou would her grateful prayer, gie her a haggis. And the crowd all yells a haggis in unison. And then soon the haggis, neeps and tatties are piped into the room, and the evening begins. Well, 1:30 on the dot. 30 minutes, my dear, you asked for, and there we are. Over to questions.
Well, thank you very much. That was wonderful. Very well done. Has anyone have any other questions, Betty? I mean, we see sometimes around the neighborhood, some places will offer a special Burns night dinner. I don't think haggis is ever included, but I know the store near me has tinned haggis. I don't know what that's like. But I'm sure that there's events all over Toronto, or at least there were before COVID.
Yes, you can buy haggis a variety of places. The 78 Frasers, to which I belong, goes to a shop called the Button Ben, which is at Ellesmere and McCowan. It's in Scarborough, and a little Scottish shop, and they have haggis in various sizes, frozen, and you can bring it home and cook it. It's great. Yeah.
Yes, back when we had the Metro Toronto Caravan, the international festival, there was always a Scottish pavilion, Glasgow or Edinburgh, and you could get haggis and meat pies and all the lovely stuff there.
We saw the haggis take a tumble one time at the St. Andrews Society Burns Supper, a very formal affair down at the University Club, and two of the members were carrying a large haggis on the hod on their shoulders, and they turned the corner too fast, and this 20-pound haggis went flying off, and it hit the stairs just like a watermelon would hit a lamppost at about 80 miles an hour, and there was haggis all up the walls, and no one had seen it in the room except my wife and me. We were at the last table, and I had the forethought to say, "Hey, everybody, they just spilled the haggis all over the floor. The room emptied. Pictures were taken." Thank goodness they had a second haggis standing by in the kitchen, another 20-pounder, which was delivered without incident. But that was a very memorable night. When the haggis flies, people remember it.
Yeah, I would imagine they would. So we have a question. Did Robbie live long enough to see the continued fun of the tradition of the meal?
David, you're welcome to jump in on this. The first Burns Supper was held in 1801 in Greenock after he died. He died in 1796. 5 years later, members of his Masonic group had a dinner in his honor and read some of his poetry and so on. So the first Burns Supper started in Greenock, and he missed it. But they have since traveled all over the world. As someone said, when the clearances came in Scotland, people brought two things with them, the Bible and their copy of Burns. And so Scots all over the world to this day read Burns and celebrate his life. David, you want to add anything about that?
He was often invited to lordship's manors to read his poetry, and then he was dismissed when they were fed their dinner. Their dinner was like a big dinner at Downton Abbey, and he was dismissed to leave to eat with the peasants or the servers in the kitchen. He was not a happy camper, and tore some strips off the laird and lady who had invited him on occasion. He lived at a particularly difficult period, the 1700s. There was a great rebellion in Ireland in 1690, which was put down by the English. Then there was a great rebellion in 1715 in Scotland, again put down by the English. Then in 1745, the Great Rebellion or the uprising in Scotland, again put down. Then in 1763 was American Revolution, again put down. And then in 1759, there was the French Revolution. Then in 1798, there was the United Irishmen's Revolution. So he lived, there was a revolution happening. There was almost every 15 years throughout his life. He lived in a tremendously difficult, dangerous time, but he was poetry. He was the first nationalist poet next to Wordsworth in England. You always remember Wordsworth's Daffodils, but Burns wrote some beautiful poems. He was a farmer, of course. He knew the natural world well. He was a great nationalist. He was a feminist long before his time. There are lots of stories told about his debauchery. He always said he was a cheap drunk. One glass of wine and he was absolutely, totally out of his mind. 2 glasses and he was under the table. 3 glasses, he was under the dress of the hostess. He had a great sense of humor and loved making jokes about life and love, but a remarkable man.
Mhm.
Burns was an exciseman, that is, he went around collecting taxes, and it was around Dumfries, and he rode hundreds and hundreds of miles in Scottish weather on the back of a horse, which wasn't very good for a man with his health conditions, which were severe. He also had a struggle by the fact that he really appreciated what the smugglers were trying to do against the English, and yet he was supposed to arrest them for what they were doing. At the end, when he was very ill, and the question is whether it was some kind of heart condition or rheumatic fever or whatever it was, the doctors fed him lead and they forced him to bathe in the winter in the Solway Firth. And it was said that he would come back in his carriage to his house in Dumfries. His skin would be absolutely blue and he would be unable to walk on his own legs. And he died, as David had said, when he was 37 in delirium. His last concern was for his wife, Jean, who was giving birth to their last child on the day of his funeral. And his concern was that she would be left in poverty. So it was a pretty sad ending to a very interesting and marvelous life.
Mhm. But that's quite often the way, isn't it? That people aren't really appreciated until after they've gone.
Yeah.
So is that good, my dear? Is that what you want?
That is wonderful. That is excellent.
We have to get I was saying we have to get our kilt jackets back to the rental company. So you'll probably
All right.
have to let us go.
Well, thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you can join us next week. Our speaker will be Sabina Ali from the Thorncliffe Park Women's Committee. Thorncliffe Park is a very active hub in the city, and we have worked with them, so I hope you can join us then.
Very good.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much.
Great to see you, Gary, by the way, in the corner. Great to see you, my friend.
Thank you. I have one question before we go. Are
Yes.
there any known descendants of Robbie Burns?
You got that one, David?
Yes, there are, and I have met them. There's a couple of them in London. There is a cousin many times removed. Her name is Armour. She's from her mother's side of the family. I don't know, there is a Burns who we met in Halifax when we did our show in Halifax. Mr. Burns from England who came over. He was the trade consulate for Great Britain, and he was a cousin several times removed on Robert's side, but those are the only ones that I've met, and that I know. I'm sure there are many more.
Thanks, Gary. Good one.
I've got one other question. Are there any copyrights on his writings, books, or poems?
Not that I've heard. I think they're in the public
I
domain.
know.
A friend of ours has an original copy of the Kilmarnock edition, the first edition of Burns' poetry, of which there were few, and he has it. He's an Edinburgh man, and he has an original Kilmarnock edition. So that's about as close to Robert Burns as you're going to get.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll give you his address if you pay me $100 and you can go in. Thanks, David. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you, Malcolm.
Guys,
Thank you very much.
great to see you.